The courtroom was packed. Family estate cases don't usually draw crowds, but when the estate is worth $47 million and the family drama has been brewing for 30 years, people take notice. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my attorney shuffling through documents that suddenly felt inadequate. Across the aisle, my father Robert Cartwright, 3, wore his signature charcoal suit with a burgundy pocket square. At 68, he still looked like the corporate lawyer he'd been for 40 years. Distinguished, authoritative, utterly convinced of his righteousness. Beside him sat my half-brother Preston, 30, whose entire personality was trust fund manager. His wife Amber scrolled through her phone, bored. Behind them, various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled 3 rows. Dad's reinforcements, here, to watch me lose. On my side of the courtroom, my attorney, Marcus Webb, and exactly 2 people. My best friend Jenna, who'd taken the day off work to support me, and my husband David, holding my hand under the table. The contrast wasn't subtle. Judge Catherine Morrison presided from the bench. Mid-50s, sharp eyes. Reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She'd been assigned this case 3 months ago when the previous judge retired unexpectedly. We're here regarding the estate of Eleanor Cartwright, deceased, Judge Morrison began. Mr. Cartwright, you recontesting your mother's will on the grounds that she lacked testamentary capacity when she executed it. Dad stood. Even at his age, he commanded a room. That's correct, Your Honor. My mother suffered from dementia in her final years. The will dated November 2023, which leaves the bulk of her estate to my daughter Charlotte, was executed during a period of significant cognitive decline. I have medical records, testimony from her physicians, and statements from family members confirming she wasn't of sound mind. Miss Cartwright, Judge Morrison looked at me. You dispute this? I stood. My legs felt steadier than I'd expected. Yes, Your Honor. My grandmother was sharp until the very end. She knew exactly what she was doing. Your Honor, Dad's attorney, Veronica Chen, notorious for winning unwinnable case, stood up smoothly. We have documentation showing Eleanor Cartwright was diagnosed with vascular dementia in 2021. Her condition deteriorated significantly by 2023. We have hospital records, prescription records, and testimony from 3 separate physicians stating she experienced confusion, memory loss, and impaired judgment. Marcus stood beside me. Your Honor, we have counter-evidence showing Mrs. Cartwright had good days and bad days, which is typical of her condition. The will was executed on a good day, with her personal attorney present, after multiple conversations about her wishes. Convenient, Veronica said. Tese aje good days always seem to coincide with decisions that benefit Miss Cartwright. That's not, Your Honor. Dad interrupted, his voice carrying that courtroom authority he'd spent decades perfecting. Let me be very clear about what's happening here. My daughter Charlotte and I have been estranged for 15 years. She barely visited her grandmother during those years. Suddenly, in the last 6 months of my mother's life, Charlotte appears and manipulates a confused, dying woman into signing away the family estate. The courtroom murmured. I felt Jenna's hand on my shoulder. That's a lie, I said quietly. Is it? Dad turned to face me directly. When was the last time you visited before 2023, Charlotte? Before grandmother got sick, I visited regularly until you banned me from the house. I never banned you. You told me I wasn't welcome. You said if I ever came back, you'd have me removed for trespassing. Your Honor? Veronica interjected smoothly. Mr. Cartwright asked his daughter to respect his mother's need for peace and quiet during her illness. He didn't ban her. Charlotte chose to interpret his reasonable request as an exclusion. He locked me out, I said, my voice rising. He changed the security codes. He told the staff not to let me in. The only way I could see grandmother was when Dad was traveling for work. This is exactly the kind of dramatic Charlotte has always displayed, Dad said, shaking his head sadly, always casting herself as the outcast, the misunderstood one. The truth is, she made choices that distanced herself from this family, and now she's trying to profit from an old woman's confusion. Judge Morrison held up her hand. Let's focus on the facts. Mr. Cartwright, You claim your mother lacked capacity. Ms. Cartwright, you claim she was lucid. Let's hear the evidence. For the next 2 hours, we watched the battle unfold. Veronica presented 3 physicians who testified that grandmother had been experiencing significant cognitive decline. Dr. Philip Strauss, her primary care physician, described incidents of confusion and memory loss. Dr. Rebecca Zhao, a neurologist, explained the progression of vascular dementia. Dr. Howard Bennett, a geriatric psychiatrist, testified that patients in grandmother's condition often experience manipulation from family members seeking financial gain. That last part felt like a knife. Marcus countered with grandmother's personal attorney, Gerald Fisk, who'd known her for 30 years. Eleanor was perfectly lucid when we discussed the will, Gerald testified. She specifically told me she wanted to ensure Charlotte inherited because Charlotte was the only grandchild who Dee truly cared for her without expectation of payment. Mr. Fisk, Veronica said during cross-examination, how much is Charlotte paying you to say that? Objection, Marcus shouted. Sustained, Judge Morrison said sharply. Ms. Chun, control yourself. But the damage was done. The jury There was no jury, but the courtroom audience might as well have been shifted uncomfortably. We presented testimony from Margaret Flores, grandmother's home health aide. Mrs. Cartwright talked about Charlotte constantly. Margaret sighed. She was always so happy when Charlotte visited. She told me Charlotte was the only one who visited just to talk, not to ask for money or check on the estate value. Ms. Flores, Veronica said sweetly, did Charlotte ever give you gifts, money, any compensation beyond your salary? Margaret hesitated. She gave me a Christmas bonus last year. How much? $5,000. The courtroom buzzed. I'd given Margaret that bonus because grandmother had wanted to, but grandmother was too sick to write checks by then, so I'd done it on her behalf. Now it looked like a bribe. Your Honor, Dad stood again. I'd like to call a character witness, someone who can speak to Charlotte's pattern of behavior and her relationship with money. Proceed, Judge Morrison said. Dad's sister, my aunt, Diane, took the stand. She was 64, perfectly coiffed, wearing pearls that probably cost more than my car. Diane, Veronica said gently, how would you describe Charlotte's relationship with her grandmother before 2023? Distant. Aunt, Diane said. Charlotte was always the rebellious one. Dropped out of law school, married someone Robert didn't approve of, moved across the country. We rarely heard from her. Did she attend family gatherings? Not for years, not until Mother got sick. And when she did start visiting, did you notice any changes? Mother started talking about changing her will, about how Charlotte was the only one who truly cared. It was very sudden, very convenient. I gripped the table edge. David's hand covered mine. Diane Veronica continued. In your opinion, was Charlotte capable of manipulating your mother? Objection, Marcus said. Speculation. I'll rephrase. Diane, based on your knowledge of both your mother and your niece, do you believe your mother would have left the majority of her estate to Charlotte if she'd been thinking clearly? Aunt Diane looked directly at me. No. Mother always intended the estate to go to Robert as the eldest son. That's how it's always been in our family. The idea that she'd suddenly change everything for a granddaughter who they barely bend present does unmake sense unless she was confused. Marcus cross-examined, but it was weak. The narrative had been established. I was the absent granddaughter who Dee swooped in during grandmother's vulnerable final months and manipulated her into rewriting the will. By lunch recess, I could feel the case slipping away. They're burying us, I told Marcus in the hallway. Every witness makes me look worse. We still have your testimony this afternoon, Marcus said. You'll get to tell your side. Will anyone believe me? Charlotte. He gripped my shoulders. Your grandmother left you that estate for a reason. She wanted you to have it. We just need to prove she was competent when she made that decision. How? Dad has 3 doctors saying she wasn't. We have Gerald, Margaret, and you. Sometimes that's enough. But I could hear the doubt in his voice. The afternoon session began with my testimony. I took the stand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Veronica Chun approached like a shark sensing blood. Ms. Cartwright, when did you first learn about the size of your grandmother's estate? I always knew it was substantial. Grandmother was very successful. When did you learn the specific amount? I'm not sure. It was never something we discussed in detail. Never. Not even when you were studying law. Not even when you realized you might inherit. Grandmother and I talked about many things. Money wasn't our focus. How convenient. Veronica smiled. Let's talk about your relationship with your father. You've been estranged for 15 years. Yes. Why? I took a breath. Because he is a controlling man who wanted me to live the life he planned instead of the life I chose. That sounds dramatic. What specifically did he do? He wanted me to finish law school, join E-Sphere, marry someone from our social circle. When I dropped out to pursue social work and married Davida, public school teacher, Dad disowned me. He disowned you. Completely cut you off. Yes. And yet, here you are, claiming your grandmother left you $47 million. Seems like you managed to maintain at least one family relationship that benefited you financially. I didn't maintain a relationship with grandmother for money. I maintained it because I loved her. Did you love her enough to visit during the 14 years you were estranged from your father? The years before she got sick, I hesitated. I visited when I could, but Dad made it difficult. He told the staff I wasn't welcome. He scheduled family events when he knew I couldn't attend. He made sure I knew I wasn't part of the family anymore. So you didn't visit regularly? Not as regularly as I wanted to. But once she got sick, once you knew the estate was substantial, you suddenly found time. That's not how it happened. Then, how did it happen, Ms. Cartwright? Walk me through the timeline. When exactly did you reconnect with your grandmother? March 2023, I called to wish her happy birthday. The housekeeper answered and told me grandmother had been hospitalized. I drove there immediately. Did your father know you were coming? No. Did he give you permission to visit? I didn't need his permission. She's my grandmother. Was your grandmother? Past tense. And when you arrived at the hospital, what happened? Grandmother recognized me immediately. She was so happy to see me. She cried and held my hand and told me she'd miss me so much. And your father? Wasn't there. He was in Hong Kong for a business deal. How convening. Objection, Marcus said. Counsel is editorializing. Sustained. Ms. Chun, ask questions. Ms. Cartwright, how long did you stay at the hospital that first visit? 4 days. Did you stay at your grandmother's house? Yes. The staff let me in. Even though your father had allegedly banned you, the staff knew grandmother wanted me there. Or maybe the staff knew there was money to be made by cooperating with you. Objection, withdrawn, Ms. Cartwright. During those 4 days, did you discuss your grandmother's will? No. We talked about our lives, about what I'd been doing, about her health. You expect this court to believe you spent 4 days with a dying woman worth $47 million and never once discussed her estate? Yes. Because that's not why I was there. Then why were you there? Because she's my grandmother and I love her. Veronica paused. Ms. Cartwright, how many times did you visit after that? I visited 3 to 4 times a week for the next 8 months until she died. 3 to 4 times a week. That's quite a commitment for someone who'd been absent for 14 years. I was making up for lost time. Or securing your inheritance. Objection, sustained, Miss Chun. Final warning. Veronica looked at her notes. When did your grandmother first mention changing her will? Juni 2023, 3 months after you reconnected. What prompted the conversation? She asked me about my life. About David? About our work. I told her about the community center we were trying to start. She asked how much funding we needed. And you told her? I said it would take about $2 million to purchase and renovate a building. $2 million. Did she offer to help? She said she'd think about it. And then, 2 weeks later, she called me to her house. She said she'd spoken with her attorney about her will. She wanted to make sure I was taken care of. And you didn't try to discourage her? Didn't suggest you'll leave the estate to your father, as tradition would dictate? I told her to do whatever made her happy. How noble. Ms. Cartwright, did you know that your grandmother's estate includes not just money, but property? A home in Connecticut worth $8 million. A vacation home in Nantucket worth $6 million. Investment properties worth another $12 million? I knew about some of it. Did you know about the investment portfolio? The stocks, bonds, and private equity holdings worth $21 million. Grandmother mentioned her investments occasionally. So you knew. You knew exactly how much you stood to gain. I knew grandmother was wealthy. I didn't think about gaining anything. I thought about spending time with her before she died. Miss Cartwright, did your grandmother ever express confusion during your visits? Ever forget who you were, where she was, what year it was? I hesitated. Sometimes, when she was tired or when the medication was strong. How often? Maybe once or twice a week. Once or twice a week. Your grandmother didn't know who you were. And yet you expect this court to believe she was competent to execute a will leaving you $47 million? She had good days and bad days. The will was executed on a good day. How convenient that all the good days involve decisions benefiting you. That's not true, isn't it? Ms. Cartwright, you're a social worker. You make what, $45,000 a year? About that. Your husband is a teacher. He makes $52,000. Yes. So, combined income of less than $100,000. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You have $67,000 in student loan debt. She paused. $47 million would change your life, wouldn't it? Yes. It would solve every financial problem you have. Yes. Give you the resources to start that community center. Yes. Buy a home, pay off debt, never worry about money again. Yes. And all you had to do was convince a confused, dying old woman that you loved her more than anyone else. That's not what happened, isn't it? Veronica looked at the judge. No further questions. I stepped down feeling like I'd been stripped bare in front of everyone. The courtroom audience dad's reinforcements whispered among themselves. Their expressions said it all. Gold digger, manipulator, thief. Marcus tried to repair the damage with redirect, but it was too late. The narrative was set. Dad took the stand next. He was masterful. 30 years of courtroom experience showed in every word. I loved my mother, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. She was an incredible woman. Brilliant, accomplished, generous. Watching her decline was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. Mr. Cartwright, his own attorney questioned him gently. When did you first notice your mother's cognitive issues? No. Early 2021. She forgot a lunch appointment, called me by my father's name, and he'd been dead for 20 years. Small things, at first, but they got worse. How did you respond? I hired the best medical team money could buy. Neurologists, geriatric specialists, in-home care. I made sure she was comfortable, safe, and surrounded by people who loved her. Did Charlotte participate in this care? She was living her life in New York, completely uninvolved. I sent her updates about Mother's condition. She never responded. Never. Not once. Not until March 2023, when she showed up at the hospital without warning. What was your reaction? I was surprised. Hopeful, actually. I thought maybe Charlotte had finally decided to reconcile, to be part of the family again. What changed your mind? Within weeks, Mother started talking about changing her will. She'd always planned to leave the estate to me. I'm the executor. I've managed her finances for years. I know her wishes. Suddenly, she's talking about leaving everything to Charlotte. Did you confront Charlotte about this? I tried. She refused to discuss it, said it was between her and Mother. When I pressed, she accused me of trying to control the estate for my own benefit. Were you trying to control the estate? I was trying to protect my mother from manipulation. The timing was too convenient. Charlotte appears after 14 years of absence, and suddenly mother wants to rewrite everything. That's not lucidity. That's coercion. Did you try to prevent Charlotte from visiting? I tried to limit visits when mother was having bad days. When she was confused or agitated, Charlotte ignored my requests and visited anyway, often telling the staff that I'd approved visits I hadn't approved. How did that make you feel? Helpless? Watching someone manipulate my mother while she was vulnerable, and being unable to stop it, because Charlotte positioned herself as the loving granddaughter while painting me as the controlling son. Dad's voice cracked. He pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed his eyes. The performance was perfect. Marcus cross-examined, but Dad was unshakable. Yes, he'd benefit financially if the original will stood. Yes, he'd been frustrated with Charlotte's choices, but everything he'd done was to protect his mother, not to enrich himself. By the time Dad stepped down, I could feel the case collapsing completely. Judge Morrison called a 15-minute recess. I stood in the hallway with Marcus, David, and Jenna. We're losing, Primera, Saeed flatly. We still have closing arguments, Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. He's going to win. Dad always wins. Charlotte, David took my hands. You told me your grandmother gave you something that would prove she knew exactly what she was doing. Where is it? I looked at my bag. Inside was grandmother's diary, a small leather-bound book she'd given me 2 weeks before she died. I'd read it cover to cover a dozen times. It contained her thoughts, memories, and secrets spanning 60 years, including secrets about Dad. I have it, I said quietly. Then use it, David said. Whatever you're afraid of, whatever consequences you're worried about, use it. Your grandmother gave it to you for a reason. If I use it, there's no going back. Dad will never forgive me. The family will never forgive me. They already don't forgive you, Jenna said bluntly. They think you're a gold digger. They think you manipulated your grandmother. You have nothing left to lose. She was right. Court reconvened. Judge Morrison looked at both attorneys. Closing arguments? Marcus stood first. He gave a competent summary of our case. Grandmother was lucid, loved me, made an informed decision, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. We were going through the motions. Veronica stood next. She was magnificent. She painted me as a calculating manipulator who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. She portrayed Dad as a loving son trying to honor his mother's true wishes. She argued that the will should be set aside and the estate distributed according to the earlier version, which left everything to Dad. Your Honor, she concluded, this case is about protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. Eleanor Cartwright deserved better than to have her final wishes twisted by someone seeking financial gain. We ask that you honor her true legacy by setting aside the fraudulent will and restoring the estate to her son, as she originally intended. She sat down to approving nods from Dad's side of the courtroom. Judge Morrison looked at me. Ms. Cartwright, is there anything you'd like to say before I make my ruling? I stood slowly. Marcus touched my arm in warning, but I shook him off. Your Honor, may I approach? Judge Morrison frowned. For what purpose? I have evidence. Evidence I didn't present earlier because I hoped I wouldn't need to. But I can't let my grandmother's legacy be distorted. What evidence? I held up the diary, my grandmother's personal diary. She kept it for 60 years. She gave it to me 2 weeks before she died and told me to open it if anyone ever questioned her mental capacity. Dad stood up. Your Honor, this is absurd. Some diary conveniently produced at the last minute. Mr. Cartwright, sit down. Judge Morrison waved me forward. Approach. I walked to the bench, my legs steadier now. I handed the diary to the judge. Your Honor, my grandmother wrote entries until the week she died. They're dated, detailed, and demonstrate perfect clarity of mind. But more importantly, they contain information about my father, information that explains why she changed her will. Judge Morrison opened the diary. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her expression shifted from skeptical to surprised to something close to shock. Ms. Cartwright, Where did you get this? Grandmother gave it to me. May 5th, 10th, 2023. She told me it contained the truth about our family. She said if Dad ever contested the will, I should show it to someone with proper authority. Proper authority for what? I took a breath. Your Honor, my grandmother wasn't just a successful businesswoman. For 40 years, she worked as a CIA asset, providing intelligence gathered through her international business connections. She had security clearance, she documented sensitive information, and she kept records of everything she learned, including things about my father. The courtroom erupted. Dad shot to his feet. This is insane. Your Honor, my daughter is clearly desperate. Mr. Cartwright. Sit down. Judge Morrison's voice cut like a blade. She was reading the diary now, page after page, her face growing paler. Veronica stood. Your Honor, whatever that diary says, it hasn't been it could be fabricated. Ms. Chun, this diary references operations that were classified until 2019. It contains code names, dates, and details that couldn't be fabricated by someone without access to intelligence archives. Judge Morrison looked up at me. Miss Cartwright, how much of this diary have you read? All of it, Your Honor? Do you understand what it contains? Yes. Grandmother explained it to me before she died. She said she'd spent her life collecting information, protecting her country, and making sacrifices nobody would ever know about. She said the only regret she had was raising a son who cared more about money than integrity. Dad's face went crimson. Your Honor, I will not sit here and be slandered by Mr. Cartwright. If you don't sit down and remain silent, I will have you removed from this courtroom. Judge Morrison's voice was ice. She turned to a page near the back of the diary and read for a long moment. Then she looked at Dad. Mr. Cartwright, do you know what Operation Black Swan was? Dad's face went white. Actually, white. The color drained so fast I thought he might pass out. Your Honor, I answer the question. Do you know what Operation Black Swan was? I'm not sure. I may have heard you were part of it. Judge Morrison's voice was flat. According to this diary, Operation Black Swan was a CIA operation involving covert financial transactions through international law firms. Your mother facilitated those transactions through her business connections, and you, as a young associate at Henderson and Wright, processed the paperwork. The courtroom was dead silent. Your Honor, Dad said carefully, if such an operation existed, it would be classified. Discussing it publicly would be illegal? Yes. Which is we am going to do something I've never done in 30 years on the bench. She looked at Veronica, tin at Marcus. I'm recusing myself from this case immediately. Your Honor? Marcus looked stunned. This diary contains information that requires security clearance to properly evaluate. I don't have that clearance. Neither does anyone else in this courtroom, except possibly Mr. Cartwright. She stood up. I'm referring this case to federal court, where it can be heard by a judge with appropriate clearance. All assets remain frozen until that hearing. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The room exploded into chaos. Dad tried to approach me, but two bailiffs blocked his path. His face had gone from white to red, a vein pulsing in his forehead. Charlotte, what have you done? I showed the truth. That diary is classified information. Possessing it is a federal crime. Grandmother gave it to me. She said it was her insurance policy, her guarantee that if you ever tried to take what she'd given me, the whole truth would come out. You stupid girl. You have no idea what you've just unleashed. I know exactly what I've unleashed. The truth about Operation Black Swan? The truth about how you used your position at Henderson and Wright to embezzle $2 million from covert CIA accounts in 1986. The truth about how grandmother covered for you, because you were her son, but she never forgave you. Dad grabbed the table edge. Around us, lawyers and family members were shouting, but I couldn't hear them. I could only see Dada's face as everything he'd hidden for 38 years crashed down around him. That money was repaid, he said hoarsely. The accounts were reconciled. It was handled quietly. It was handled by grandmother, who used her own money to replace what you stole. She saved your career, your reputation, your freedom, and in return you spent 30 years resenting her, trying to control her, waiting for her to die so you could finally get your hands on the estate you thought you deserved. Charlotte? She told me everything. Dad. Every sacrifice she made for you. Every time she covered up your mistakes. Every time she chose your reputation over her own integrity. And when she got sick, when she finally had the clarity to see you for what you really are, she made sure you wouldn't benefit from her death. Your honor. Veronica was shouting at Judge Morrison, who was already leaving through her chamber door. You can't just recuse yourself. This is highly irregular, but Judge Morrison was gone. Marcus grabbed my arm. Charlotte, we need to leave. Now. Why? Because in about 5 minutes, federal agents are going to show up and confiscate that diary, and possibly arrest you for possessing classified information. Grandmother told me to use it. That doesn't make it legal. David appeared at my side. Cars out front. Let's go. We pushed through the crowd. Behind us, I heard Dad shouting. Heard Veronica demanding answers. Heard the chaos of a case that had just exploded beyond anyone's control. We made it to the car just as 2 black SUVs pulled up to the courthouse. Federal agents, David said, watching them enter the building. Your lawyer was right. They're going to want the diary, I said. Do you still have it? No. Judge Morrison has it. Good. Let them sort it out. We drove away as more vehicles arrived. Police. Federal agents. News. Someone had tipped off the media. My phone rang unknown number. Hello, Ms. Cartwright. This is Agent Sarah Brennan with the FBI. I need you to return to the courthouse immediately. Why? We need to discuss the diary you presented to Judge Morrison. Specifically, we need to understand how you came into possession of classified information. My grandmother gave it to me. Eleanor Cartwright died 8 months ago. That diary should have been surrendered to the CIA immediately upon her death. She told me to keep it. She said it was mine. Ms. Cartwright, possessing that diary is a federal crime. Revealing its contents in open court could be considered as we need to speak with you immediately. I looked at David. He shook his head firmly. Agent Brennan, I'll be happy to speak with you, but I need to consult with my attorney first. Don't leave the city, Miss Cartwright. The line went dead. This is bad, Jenna said from the back seat. This is really bad. Grandmother wouldn't have given me the diary if it was going to destroy me, I said. She was too smart for that. There's something else going on. Like what? Like, maybe she wanted this to happen. Maybe she wanted the truth about Dad to come out, and this was the only way. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Charlotte, don't talk to anyone. Federal agents are asking about you. They've seized the diary and they're questioning Judge Morrison. They want to know how much you read, who you told, what you remember. What should I do? Come to my office. I'm calling in a favor, a lawyer who specializes in classified information cases. Don't say anything to anyone until she's present. The next 48 hours were a blur. Federal agents interviewed me 3 times. Each time, I repeated the same story. Grandmother gave me the diary. She told me to use it if Dad contested the will. I did what she instructed. They asked what I remembered from the diary. I told them, Operation Black Swan. Dad's embezzlement, grandmother's cover-up. The basics. Nothing more. They asked if I'd made copies. I said no. They asked if I'd told anyone else about the contents. I said only my attorney. They asked if I understood the seriousness of possessing classified information. I said I did now, but grandmother never explained the legal implications. On the 3rd day, a different agent arrived, older, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. Ms. Cartwright, I'm Deputy Director James Holbrook, CIA. I knew your grandmother. I sat up straighter. You did. Eleanor was one of our most valuable assets for 40 years. She gathered intelligence through her business connections that saved lives and prevented conflicts. She was brilliant, dedicated, and absolutely meticulous. Then you know she wouldn't have given me that diary carelessly. That's exactly what I know, which is why I'm here. He pulled out a folder. Your grandmother filed paperwork with us 3 years ago. Paperwork that declassified certain information and authorized its transfer to you upon her death. She declassified Operation Black Swan, not the operation itself. But she declassified her own role in it, and she declassified information about your father's involvement. Everything in that diary related to the Cartwright family is no longer classified. Everything related to ongoing operations or other assets remains classified. So I didn't break the law. You skirted very close to it, but no, technically, you're in the clear. Your grandmother made sure of that. I sat back, relief flooding through me. She planned this. She planned everything. Eleanor didn't make mistakes. He paused. However, there's a complication. What complication? Your father, Operation Black Swan involvement wasn't limited to the embezzlement you mentioned in court. He was a participant in the operation itself, processing documents, facilitating transfers. When he embezzled that money, he didn't just steal from the CIA. He compromised an active operation. But grandmother covered it up. She did, and in doing so, she may have committed crimes herself. Obstruction, false reporting, financial fraud. We're investigating now. My stomach dropped. You're investigating grandmother. She's dead. We're investigating the operation, but your father is very much alive, and if we determine he compromised national security, he'll face federal charges. Charges that could result in 20 years in prison. I thought about Dad's white face when Judge Morrison said Operation Black Swan. Thought about 38 years of guilt and fear, thinking he'd gotten away with it. Grandmother had given him 38 years of freedom, and then she'd made sure the truth would come out after her death, when she couldn't be punished for covering it up. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home. The federal court will schedule a new hearing on your grandmother's estate. A judge with proper clearance will review the diaritha declassified portions and make a determination about your grandmother's mental capacity. My guess, they'll uphold the will. And Dad, that's a separate matter. Criminal investigation could take months or years. But Ms. Cartwright, your inheritance isn't going to help him. Eleanor made sure of that too. The will specifically states that the estate cannot be used to pay for any legal defense of other family members. If your father goes to trial, he's on his own. He stood to leave. Deputy Director Holbrook, yes, was grandmother really that brilliant? Planning all of this? He smiled slightly. Eleanor Cartwright spent 40 years thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone around her. This isn't brilliance. This is just how she operated. She set up every piece years in advance, and then she let events play out exactly as she'd predicted. She knew Dad would contest the will. She counted on it. It was the only way to force the truth into the open without implicating herself. She's been dead for 8 months, Ms. Cartwright. She can't face charges, but your father can. He left. I sat in the conference room alone, thinking about grandmother's final gift. Not just the money. Justice. 3 months later, the federal court hearing took place. Judge William Crawford, retired military, current federal judge, security clearance level I couldn't even comprehend. He'd reviewed the diary. All of it. I've read Eleanor Cartwright's diary cover to cover, he began. I've consulted with CIA officials, REVIEWED declassification documents, and examined medical records. Here's what I've determined. Eleanor Cartwright was of absolutely sound mind when she executed her final will. In fact, her cognitive abilities remained sharp until days before her death, which is remarkable given her diagnosis. Dad sat at the defense table, his new attorney beside him. He looked 10 years older than he had at the first hearing. Federal charges were pending. His law firm had suspended him. His reputation was destroyed. The diary demonstrates sophisticated understanding of complex operations, detailed memory of events spanning 60 years, and clear articulation of her wishes. She understood exactly what she was doing when she left her estate to Charlotte Cartwright. That decision stands. The gavel came down. I'd won. The estate settled 6 months later. $47 million, minus legal fees, minus taxes. Still more money than I'd ever imagined having. Dad went to trial for his role in Operation Black Swan. The jury convicted him of embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and compromising classified operations. 15 years in federal prison. Preston contested his father's conviction, claiming it was politically motivated. The appeals court disagreed. Aunt Diane stopped speaking to me entirely. Most of the family did. I didn't care. 1 year after grandmother's death, David and I stood in front of a building in Queens. 3 stories, brick facade, perfect location. "This is it?" David asked. "This is it. Our community center. We'd bought it for $2.1 million. Another $900,000 in renovations, programs for kids, job training for adults, mental health services, food pantry, the Eleanor Cartwright Community Center." Above the door, we'd mounted a plaque in memory of Eleanor Cartwright, who spent her life serving her country and her family, often without recognition or thanks. May this center honor her legacy of service, sacrifice, and unwavering integrity. We opened the doors on the anniversary of her death. 300 people showed up, neighbors, social workers, teachers, local officials. I stood at the entrance, watching people stream in, and I thought about grandmother's final words to me. "Charlotte, I'm giving you more than money. I'm giving you the truth. Use it wisely, use it to build something good. And don't let your father's mistakes define our family's legacy." I hadn't let them. 2 years later, I got a letter from Dad. He was in federal prison in Pennsylvania, serving year 3 of his sentence. "Charlotte, I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it. I wouldn't blame you, but I needed to write it anyway. I've had a lot of time to think about Mom, about the choices I made, about how everything fell apart. You were right. I resented her. I spent 30 years thinking I deserved her estate because I'd built my career, made my money, earned my success. I thought she owed me. But she didn't owe me anything. She'd already given me everything: my freedom, my reputation, my career. She paid for my mistakes and never asked for credit, and I repaid her by treating her like a bank. You loved her, actually loved her, visited her, talked to her, sat with her, not because you wanted her money, but because she was your grandmother. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. Mom made the right choice. The estate should go to someone who'll use it for good. You're doing that. The community center, the program's mom would be proud. I'm sorry for everything. Dad. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and didn't respond. Maybe someday, but not yet. 5 years after grandmother's death, I was sitting in my office at the community center when a woman in her 70s walked in. Are you Charlotte Cartwright? Yes. Can I help you? I'm Margaret Walsh. I worked with your grandmother at the CIA. I was her handler for 20 years. Primera, stood up. Please, sit down. She sat, studying me carefully. Eleanor talked about you constantly. She was so proud of you. Proud that you'd chosen social work over law. Proud that you'd married for love instead of status. Proud that you'd stood up to your father. She never told me any of that. She wouldn't. Eleanor wasn't sentimental, but she documented everything in her reports. Her communications included references to you, to her hopes for your future. Margaret pulled out an envelope. She asked me to deliver this to you 5 years after her death. She said you'd need time to build the center, Establish the programs. Prove to yourself that you could manage the inheritance responsibly. I took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in grandmother's handwriting. Dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, then 5 years have passed since my death. Margaret has delivered this letter as I instructed, and you've used the inheritance to build something meaningful. I always knew you would. I want to explain why I did what I did, not just leaving you the estate, but exposing your father's crimes. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice. And it was necessary. Robert made mistakes when he was young, mistakes I covered up to protect him. I thought I was being a good mother, but I wasn't. I was teaching him that consequences don't apply to him, that money and connections can erase anything, that integrity doesn't matter if you're rich enough. I created the man who resented me, who viewed me as a resource instead of a person, who thought he deserved my estate simply because he was my son. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late to fix him. But it wasn't too late to fix my legacy. You are my legacy, Charlotte. Not the money, not the properties, not the businesses. You, your integrity, your compassion, your commitment to service. I spent 40 years serving my country in secret. You're spending your life serving your community, openly. We're doing the same work, just in different ways. I'm proud of you. I always have been, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you that more often when I was alive. Use the inheritance well. Continue the work, and know that everything I did, including the difficult choices, including exposing Robert's crimes, was to ensure that good people like you would have the resources to build a better world. All my love. Grandmother. I read the letter through tears. Margaret handed me a tissue. She loved you very much, Margaret said quietly. Everything she did was to protect you and empower you. The diary, the declassification, the timing of the revelations, all of it was designed to give you control of your own future. She sacrificed her son to save me. She held her son accountable for his choices. There's a difference. Robert had 38 years to make better decisions. He chose not to. Eleanor simply made sure he couldn't escape justice forever. Margaret stood to leave. Your grandmother was one of the finest people I ever worked with. I'm glad her legacy is in your hands. After she left, I sat alone in my office, holding grandmother's letter. Outside, I could hear the community center buzzing with life. Kids in the art program, adults in the job training workshop, families picking up food from the pantry, all of it funded by grandmother's money, built on grandmother's sacrifice, honoring grandmother's legacy. Dad had wanted the estate so he could maintain his lifestyle, preserve his status, pass wealth to his son. Grandmother had given it to me so I could change lives. She'd known exactly what she was doing. She always did. 10 years after grandmother's death, the Eleanor Cartwright Community Center had expanded to 3 locations, served 15,000 people annually, and been recognized as one of the most effective community programs in New York. I stood at the dedication ceremony for the 3rd location, watching Mayor Adams cut the ribbon. Beside me was Margaret Walsh, now 87, who'd become a board member. In my pocket was grandmother's final letter, worn from being reread 1,000 times. I thought about Dad, released from prison last year, living quietly in Florida, trying to rebuild a life. I thought about Preston, who'd finally called last month to apologize, to acknowledge what his father had done. I thought about the family I'd lost and the family I'd built, David, our 2 kids, the community that surrounded us. And I thought about grandmother, who'd spent 40 years in the shadows protecting her country, and then spent her final act protecting me. She'd given me more than money. She'd given me purpose, and I'd used it exactly as she'd hoped. Thank you, grandmother, I whispered. The wind moved through the trees, carrying my words away. Somewhere, I hoped she heard them.